Oregon's 82nd legislative session gets underway this Tuesday, and already the legislature has marching orders from new Governor Tina Kotek to deal with the state's homeless and affordable housing crisis. Among those tasked with making that happen, new Senate President Rob Wagner, a Democrat from Lake Oswego, the former Senate Majority Leader and lobbyist, is here to talk all things legislature. Senate President Rob Wagner, thanks for joining us on Eye on Northwest Politics.
And thank you for having me, Ken. It's great being here.
Well, you succeed Peter Courtney, who was Senate President for 20 years and was the longest-serving legislator in Oregon history. What's that like to replace him?
Well, it's often the first question that I get. I think back to December when Peter had his final day on the floor, and I was able to address the legislature and give him the accolades that he deserved. We are all better legislators and better human beings for having Peter as the president for that long.
Well, Governor Kotek said during her campaign that her first order of business would be to declare a homeless emergency, which she did. She signed those 3 executive orders that we talked about. Here's what she said when she did that.
We as a state and our state agencies have to prioritize this issue. Every agency is going to be put on notice that this is part of your mission as well. Dealing with housing and homelessness, making sure there are no barriers to communities getting the help they need.
Well, what did you think when you heard that, and what does this mean for the legislature this session?
Well, during the election cycle, as you can imagine, and then from all of our constituents, housing, homelessness, housing affordability is a huge issue. It's probably the top issue that we're going to be dealing with. It's a humanitarian crisis right now. So I think the governor stepping in on her first day, we're ready to answer the call in the Senate. There's a lot we can be doing. I think the fact that she's encouraging local governments, community nonprofits, the private sector, trying to pull everybody together is the right move. And we're here to do our part to support the governor.
Specifically, what bills do you think will emerge in order to deal with this crisis from the legislature standpoint?
Well, I think it's a little bit premature. We have a housing chair in the Senate, Casey Jama, who's been working the last 2 years on this. I think it's a marriage and a mix. You're going to look at things around affordable housing. You're going to see what the governor has stated, that we need to bring more housing online. We need new housing starts, so what can we do around flexibility on that? And then ultimately, there is something about the fact that we have folks living on the street, unsheltered right now, and we need to be doing a much better job addressing their concerns, providing wraparound supports, providing shelter. Ultimately, though, it's not an either or. It really is a moment where we're talking about yes and. So every single thing that we possibly can be doing in housing, we need to have in front of us.
One of the things that we see on the street is people with mental health issues. And there's going to be some asking of the legislature for help with dealing with the state's mental health crisis. So how do you see that?
Well, and it's interesting because you see it very visibly when you're approached on the street. So there's always that perception of this is what behavioral mental health issues are. It's deeper than that. So we have people in our communities across the state of Oregon that have had issues trying to access the behavioral mental health system. And there's, it's really in the pandemic has exacerbated a lot of that need. The last legislative session, we made landmark investments, but it takes time for those investments actually to make their way into community, and especially to try to encourage people and provide more pathways for career opportunities as providers. That's going to be a big focus of what we're going to be looking at this session.
You know, cities including Portland will be asking for millions of dollars to help with these crises. So what is the state's budget situation, and how will you monitor how that money is spent?
Well, as you know, we're limited in terms of what we have as available resources. So there's always tough questions as it relates to budget challenges. I think the last couple years, we've seen a lot of federal money coming into states across the country, American Recovery Act dollars. So with potentially a softening economy, it's going to be really difficult conversations to try to figure out how to weigh these competing needs. So ultimately, it's going to be asking citizens to engage with the legislature, to talk about the issues that they want to see us addressing. As I mentioned, though, housing, behavioral health, some of these issues are really at crisis moments, and I know that we're going to try to make every effort we can to make strategic investments in those areas.
However, the last revenue forecast says that in terms of revenue, the money the state is bringing in, that we're in a fairly good position, correct?
Well, What's been encouraging is for the last 20 years, actually, well, since the Great Recession, we've done a really good job building up our reserves. So we do have pretty good ending balance and some good reserves that we can rely on, both for schools and other programs. That said, we need to be fiscally prudent. So there's going to be some tough choices and some tough conversations. But like I said, housing, behavioral health, these are issues that I think voters really expect us to jump in and solve, and we're going to be there doing the work.
What are the other priorities that you see the legislature dealing with?
I think that you're going to hear a lot around jobs and career opportunities. The federal government passed the CHIPS Act around semiconductors and looking at workforce there. Thank you to Senator Wyden, Senator Merkley, and our entire federal delegation for the work that they did in that space. We have a special committee established already to look at how do we put together a package to encourage more jobs in the semiconductor industry. So that's going to be one area. We're hoping to get an early win on that the next couple months. An area that I'm particularly focused on, probably given kind of what I've done with my career as well, is around looking at not just a job, but how do you find pathway to career. There was an effort this last interim to go around the state and listen to students from Ontario to Medford to Corvallis to Eugene. And what we're finding is we need to do a better job in terms of providing opportunities for career pathways and post-secondary opportunity for students. So that's going to be a big focus of mine. We also need to meet the challenge of our workforce around childcare and early childhood education. And then finally, you're going to hear, I think, consistently issues around both mitigation and efforts to establish decreasing carbon emissions. This climate change is here. We're seeing the impacts of it. We know about drought. We can see the impacts every summer around wildfire. So the legislature needs to step in and do a lot more work in that space.
The Democrats still control the legislature. However, you don't have the supermajorities that you had in past legislatures. What does this do in terms of negotiating with the Republicans in Salem?
Well, I think it's not necessarily just about the numbers. It's a fascinating time to be in the state legislature. I had a chance to address the joint session of the legislature this last Monday, and it was a little bit of research. Nearly half of the legislature have never served in a session in person. So going back to 2019, you have this amazing opportunity, though, to hit refresh and to be able to lean into the experiences that those people bring into the legislative system. So it's really, there's a partisan angle that people like to take, but there's also just leaning into the experiences of people from across the state. So I'm actually really excited about the ability for Democrats and Republicans to work together to try to solve issues that are of common purpose. And I think when you talk about housing, behavioral mental health, helping our rural communities with drought, those are issues that we can all lean in on together.
Senator Wagner, we've got about 30 seconds here, but after this break that we're going to take, we'll be talking with a spokesperson from the Greater Idaho Movement. And I know that their bill has been read, introduced. What do you think of that? And where do you think we'll go with this, if anywhere?
Well, I'll just start with this. I am from Oregon. I grew up here, and so this is my home. I love all of Oregon. And I think that I haven't spent a lot of time working on that issue. I do have regular engagement with the legislators from that area. I don't think that bill's going to move forward this session. But we do need to focus on listening to rural communities and what their issues are. So let's focus on the issues that can unite us and not always just divide us.
All right. Senator Rob Wagner, Senate President for this new legislative session. Thank you for joining me on Eye on Northwest Politics.
Thank you, Ken.